if you would have told me all this was going to happen about 10, even 7 years ago, I would have told you that you were nuts. This was not, oh my God, my friends from Chile are also here. This is a little crazy. Oftentimes the journeys that we have around innovation and entrepreneurship and trying to understand that, connecting that magic of who you are with what you get to do every single day, 9 times out of 10 there's a disconnect. There's this feeling that the dots just don't connect. It feels like the skill sets that I'm getting sort of fit, but I'm not quite sure ultimately where it's going to go, where it's going to land. Ain't happening?
Not yet.
That's fine. I'm going to keep waxing poetic. So a little bit about my background, and then I'll catch up on the fancy pictures when we get there. So when I say that oftentimes the things that you do don't necessarily connect with the path that you're on, when I was a little kid, I had really debilitating asthma and allergies. I couldn't really go outside till I was about 8 years old. And when I share that with you, it's not kind of like what you think about these days with kids with childhood asthma, where yeah, you carry around a little inhaler and you take a little puff off of it, you get a little wheezy, and that's as far as you go. I truly couldn't go outside and play when the pollen count was above a certain point. If the house got too dusty, that sent me to the hospital. My mom's favorite was if I actually touched a piece of cheese, physically touched a piece of cheese, or like slapped one of those Kraft singles on my face, which, you know, all little kids like to do. Maybe that was just me. That would actually send me to the hospital as well, because I'd actually have an allergic reaction that would lead to anaphylactic shock. So the doctors were pretty adamant with my parents that this little boy will never ever be able to go outside. He will never be able to play like a normal kid. You know, make plans, help him understand that his life will never be one of those normal lives that the little kids want to have. But my parents, thank God I got the parents that I got, because they really started looking for different ways to address this issue. One of the first things that they started doing, with sort of the doctor's blessing, they said, you know, well, if in summertime is when all the allergens are out, wintertime is really the time that he should go outside, because the colder it is, the less allergens there are outside. So when all the other little kids were getting pulled inside during snowstorms and during really bad weather, I was getting bundled up in 3 snowsuits and getting shoved out the door to go roll around in the snow. And so whenever people ask me, how did you build this tolerance and train for all these big international expeditions, I would tell people all the time that, yeah, it's my mom throwing me outside in a snowsuit really is what started it. And so I think it begs this question of some of the first questions that we ask ourselves when we're young, right? The things that we're most passionate about straight out of the gate. So kids have these ideas of what they want to be, right? So give me some of the things that you thought about when you were kids of what you wanted to be when you grew up. What did you want to be when you grew up? Or maybe you're still trying to figure that out.
Architect.
Architect, okay, that's a good one. Any astronauts, doctors, firefighters, cops? What did you want to, I'm curious, Peter. What did you want to be?
Billionaire.
Billionaire? Yeah, well, you're well on your way, partner. Yeah, he's the president of our class, pretty much, so in case anybody's wondering. And for me, it was no different. I definitely had the same type of thoughts, but mine came in kind of a different way. Because I really couldn't go outside, my dad had these collections of National Geographic magazines, and pretty much what I could do, being a sick little kid, I just kind of became a voracious reader. I pulled down every magazine I could get my hands on. I'd carry a stack of them. Hey, no, yep, is that me?
Yep.
There you go. That's it.
1 second. Sorry.
Sweet. Sorry. And I'd carry them into the bedroom, and I'd literally just start flipping through the pages, looking at articles from these places all over the world, recognizing that it would be like going to the moon for me. These pictures from Africa, from Madagascar, from all these different places on the planet. And one day I came across an article about the first American expedition to Everest. And it turns out that the first American to Everest, Jim Whittaker, also had really bad asthma and allergies. And the article in National Geographic actually talked about it. And I remember being an 8-year-old kid dragging this magazine into my parents' bedroom, pointing to the picture of Jim Whittaker and saying, this guy has what I have. And he climbed Everest. And look, the article talks about Jim Whittaker, and my mom laughed so I couldn't pronounce his name. I called him Whitter. Jim Whitter, parents actually took him up around Mount Rainier, had him swim in Lake Squamish, had him do all this other stuff. This is what I want to do. I want to be a mountain guide. I want to climb Mount Everest. So even as an 8-year-old, whenever anybody would ask me, that question that all little kids get, right? what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd say straight up, I want to be a mountain guide. I want to climb Everest. Now think about that for a minute, right? Are you an architect? No. You're close to being a billionaire, but not quite there yet, right? So I've asked myself a lot over the years, why do we disconnect from these passions that we have when we're young, the things that are really outlandish, outrageous, bold ideas, but bit by bit, perhaps they become less practical. Perhaps they don't necessarily connect to the things that we want to do and how we want to do it. And you know, for me, my journey of trying to make all this electronics work today, there you go, you know, was really starting to kind of talk about some of these pieces and understanding, you know, how to make that journey work. And so having a father from Ecuador came in really, really handy. My mom's American, my dad's Ecuadorian. And so I spent a lot of time over the summers down with my family in Ecuador climbing this mountain, Cotopaxi, now an active volcano, used to be a semi-active volcano, 19,300 feet. And while most other friends were having normal jobs in high school, mowing lawns and maybe a lifeguard at a pool, I had one request of my parents. I wanted to go back down to Ecuador and I wanted to be a hut boy on Cotopaxi. So if you've seen the movie Waterboy with Adam Sandler, you kind of know what being a hut boy is like. It's the most god-awful, thankless, entry-level job you could possibly imagine. And I loved every minute of it because I felt like I was connected to the community that I wanted to be a part of. You know, when you have this dream of doing something, especially even when you're young, I oftentimes think that the way the journey starts is finding people that are the most passionate as you are about the same or similar things. And it feeds off of itself. And I mean, I was mopping bathrooms, I was making breakfast, I was making dinner, I was cleaning the bunkhouses, I was doing all the, you know, the god-awful, thankless jobs that you would normally think of on a mountain like this, but also got to see and do some amazing things and be around a community. You know, Ecuador is kind of I call it a warm-up country for mountaineers. So a lot of international guiding companies, iconic guiding companies that you'd hear about from all over the world would bring their clients down to warm up on mountains in Ecuador before going on to the Himalayas, before going on to other mountains all over the world. And so as a high school kid, I got to meet heroes that I read about in magazines and in books because they'd be coming through with their clients before going off to Everest or going off to some of these other places. So I was just the kid with the broom trying to listen in on the conversations in the dining room of the hut. And, you know, over the years, you know, really trying to kind of learn my own skill set and trying to push it a little bit, it's not a very well accepted career, mountain guiding in the United States. When I tell people that I basically got an undergrad in guiding, if you said that in Europe or in Latin America, there's some weight to it. There's some credence to it. You say it in the United States, you're kind of you're what? You're a camp counselor? I don't understand. Like, what do you run a camp? You take people camping. I see. Whereas in Europe, if you live in Chamonix or places like that, or Grindelwald, I mean, it's literally PhD level work in snow, you know, snow sciences and altitude physiology and all the technical skills required to do the job that you have to do. And, you know, my journey in Ecuador into the big mountains was really no different. You know, my apprenticeships were based on some of those relationships that I had with some of my heroes that were coming through. And I tell people the reason why I got some of those apprenticeships was because I was either stupid enough or naive enough or bold enough to just ask for the job. I actually just showed up and started talking to my heroes at night over, you know, I'd make sure there's a little bit of sugar in their coffee in the morning and say, you know, listen, if you ever need somebody to help, right here, here's what I can do. Constantly putting my hopefully best foot forward to the point where finally I got hired by an international guiding company based out of New Zealand, Adventure Consultants. So if you've seen the movie Everest or if you've read the book Into Thin Air, you'll know that they lost their CEO on Everest in 1996, Rob Hall. And by the time I got hired in the early 2000s, the new CEO, Guy Cotter, they were on this journey to being a global brand again. Now at this point, I had been to the Himalayas a little bit, I had done a few things, but instead of just asking for a normal guiding job after, you know, a little bit of a limited career in the Himalayas, I looked Guy square in the eye and I said, listen, you're not competing on an international scale. You should be a global brand again. You haven't been a global brand since Rob was killed. Don't just hire me as a guide, hire me as your chief operating officer, and I'll get you back to being a global brand. I'll put all those trips back on the books for you. I'll find the clients, I'll run the trips, I'll build the itineraries. Just give me the chance. Now, there's one thing to say about business acumen, right? And yeah, I am an EMBA student right now, realizing full well, I think back on that now, like it's a Christmas miracle. Nobody died, the company didn't go bankrupt, and we actually had a really good brand strategy to figure it out. But you can get pretty far with passion. And that was the thing that kind of astounded me, is that if you're hungry and you're focused and you're pointed in an accurate direction, connecting that skill set to what you define as magic in your everyday life, there's actually some merit to that. So being able to serve as a chief operating officer for this amazing international company, not having a whole lot of skill sets other than being a pretty good technical altitude climber, I learned on my feet to try to figure out how to do this. And I share this map with you with some dots on mountain ranges around the world that I've been lucky enough to not only climb in, but also work in, take clients there, bring them there and bring them home all in one piece. And when most people think about guiding big mountains, this is a picture out of Outside Magazine from a couple of years ago. This is really what people think about, right? When they think about high visibility, high profile jobs. It's the hero shot, right? It's the glossy magazine article like, ooh, that's a cool picture. Isn't that great? And I got to admit, being young and being pretty successful in this arena, my ego was out of control, completely out of control. My friends from Chile, Nico, if you haven't met Nico and his wife, Sarah yet, who are visiting, we work together on Wharton trips and in the mountains in Latin America. He's got a good friend, Kiko. I know, it's crazy, right? Kiko and Nico, Nicholas and Eugene, believe it or not. This is why we call him Kiko. Kiko and I grew up together in the mountains, and we talk a lot about how, we laugh that we never killed anybody, but it's amazing that ego, when you have a lot of success when you're young, really kind of runs away. And it's ironic being in this space, talking about ideas, talking about making stuff happen, because really, my argument is you need a little bit of ego to make this stuff happen. We talk so much about humility and so much about, Coloradans are great at it, the humble brag. Anybody ever heard of this? Yeah, like, me and my climbing buddies get around. People that have climbed Everest multiple times, like, yeah, I've done it 6 times, but you climbed K2. Yeah, but I haven't climbed without oxygen. And so there's this constant humble brag. And Nina actually just gave a great keynote to our summit where she had this picture of humble written on the screen and a big circle around it and a line through it. I think if you're proud of what you do and you have a capacity and a capability to be the best at what you do, humility needs to kind of drop a little bit. And I know that's a little against the grain with what people think and say, but I believe that dropping the humility and elevating the ego a little bit can drive you towards believing that you can do it when you might not be fully capable. That comment, fake it till you make it, you hear a lot, and we chuckle. But when it comes to gender demographics and some of those different pieces, men are underqualified normally when they get the job. Women are overqualified when they get the job. And I always try to figure out where ego falls in that equation. And, stuff like this is always fun, but, the reality of it is, and I tell people this all the time, kind of tongue in cheek, high altitude guiding or running a company is like any other job. It's just helping people manage their baggage, literally and metaphorically. I mean, how often do you find yourself working with teams where you feel like you got to drag somebody along, you got to elevate somebody that's not cutting the mustard, or you feel like they're dead weight, or you feel like you're dead weight and you don't know how to translate the fact that maybe you need a little help. And so understanding how to work all those those interpersonal dynamics into this equation was definitely something that I learned at a kind of a really young age. And I also got to work with really interesting staff. And I don't know if anybody's ever worked with donkeys before. Anybody in the room ever worked with donkeys before? No one in this room. Yeah, I was like, come on. I'm kind of trying not to make eye contact. I'm like, I know you guys have been in Aconcagua. Come on. And it was really one of those journeys that when I started out thinking I wanted to be a mountain guide, nobody told me I was going to have to become a mule driver and a donkey whisperer to actually run some of the expeditions that I needed to run. It's all these skill sets that happen around that big idea that I think are the ones that actually build and paint a bigger picture of what's possible. So, the journey through the 7 summits was kind of all over the place, going from Aconcagua, this is the highest mountain in the southern hemisphere on the border of Chile and Argentina, spending a lot of seasons down there and really trying to understand what high altitude physiology was like, and also, what happens when viento blanco shows up, the white wind, and people come out of storms that look like that with fingers that look like that. Or especially after this one specific storm, when we came around the corner after the storm was over with going to high camp, we saw that, which was 2 Belgian climbers that fell in the storm, died of exposure, and were so frozen to the ground they had to be buried where they fell. You know, all of a sudden it dawned on me as a career professional, is this is all I ever wanted to do with my life, was to be a mountain guide, realizing that the ramifications that could happen if I wasn't paying attention to effective communication and impactful leadership. That was the end result. That's what was possible. And you know, that's kind of a sobering moment, especially for a 20-something-year-old guide. And you know, the way the lesson for communication really got driven home was in the form of a Valentine. So let me just bear with me for a second. My mom's an art teacher, and some of the first talks that I ever gave were to her classes, and this little girl came up to me after one talk and said, would you carry this Valentine to it was right around Valentine's Day, and she said, would you carry this Valentine to your next summit, take a picture and bring the picture back? And I said, sure, no problem. And I took this picture on the summit of that expedition, and it's a Charlie Brown quote. I don't know if you can see it. She spelled lose wrong. She spelled it loose. So I had to cross out one O. As a little kid, I know, right? How can we lose when we're so sincere? And over the years, it's gotten me thinking about effective communication and how deeply we challenge ourselves around this aspect of our lives. And the 2 points that I would want to share with you are, if you have the capacity to remove ego and agenda from absolutely everything you say, would you be more effective in your communication? If you truly understand the definition of sincerity within your communication ethos, would it be impactful to you? And so, you know, moving forward as a mountain guide, I really tried to take that to heart. You know, the career trajectory got turned on high gear for a couple of years there, and I got sent to Alaska, Denali. This is our one of the 7 summits, highest mountain in the North American continent. And you know, I tell people a lot, it's an art and an exercise in suffering. It's really one of those places that where American mountain guides go to cut their teeth. And for the first 3 seasons after trying to reach the summit, I had nothing but a big goose egg after 3 seasons of trying. Now imagine talking to your boss, being on a pretty good career trajectory, the first year having a conversation with your boss and saying, you know, whatever your goals are, whatever your KPIs, your key performance indicators are, you know, we didn't hit our numbers this year, boss. Sorry, apologize. We'll get them next year. Now imagine the second year. Ooh, we came close a couple times, but sorry, we just didn't make it happen. Now imagine if it happened a third year. What would that feel like? What would that conversation be like? And you know, so for me to have the brakes slam so hard and the door slam so hard on my journey as a professional guide, and feeling like my success trajectory, my career trajectory was being completely derailed, I got together with a couple of guide buddies one night, and we just asked a really simple question. We didn't want to go home at the end of another season without a summit in our pocket. And instead of being sincere about our communication and realizing that the summit wasn't the most important part, but that it was really about trying to figure out how to become a better guide, we basically packed up enough food and fuel that we needed and flew back into base camp, started walking, didn't stop until we summited, and tried to come all the way back down and basically climbed Denali in one push, around about an 80-hour round trip effort, because the sun doesn't go down in the summer up in Alaska. All you have to worry about is weather and fatigue. And this picture of me was on the summit of that trip, and I clearly remember having this moment of lucid thought and recognizing that I actually thought that I was on a beach somewhere when this picture was taken. I'm like, God, this is so warm, it's so beautiful, and I snap back into reality. I'm like, we're gonna die. That was a very, very clear thought at that point. And when we stumbled back down the hill, you know, when we were on our way up, I passed a buddy, the tall guy in this picture, and I said, listen, this is what we're doing. If you see us coming back down, just try to help us get back on our feet and get moving, because we're going to be unhinged at that point. And when we got back down to camp that's halfway up the mountain, we took this picture with him. We were so fortunate with weather. And the minute this picture was taken, all 3 of us went off to our packs and laid down and completely passed out. And, you know, Pete helped us get back on our feet and go another 6 hours towards base camp to complete the 81-hour round trip effort. And oftentimes I really think about the friends that we have personally and professionally that are actually willing to give us that metaphorical kick when we need it the most. You know, when we're halfway towards a goal or we're 3/4 towards a goal, and it would have been easy for Pete to say, here's a nice warm tent, crawl in, relax, take a nap. Instead, he got us back on our feet and said, you're 6 more hours away from base camp. Keep moving, head on down the hill. You're almost there. So you really have to consider who's on your team these days and how willing are they to truly, definitively help you when you need it the most. And the other lesson that I want to share with you that I got from my time in Alaska was about failure. And I think this one's important when it comes to innovation and entrepreneurship. So a little bit about this picture. Denali's in a national park. And because it's in a national park, there are rangers stationed halfway up the mountain that sort of check all the teams that come back down the hill. So if you've summited, if you didn't, anybody got frostbite, anybody sick, blah, blah, blah. They keep a registry. And so this is Daryl, who's an Alaskan ranger on the mountain. And a little bit of something about Daryl. Daryl is from Talkeetna. Daryl can't sing, and he can't play the guitar. Okay? So this was Daryl's little shtick with every team that came down. So he'd stand outside the ranger hut, and he'd be pointing at different teams, and he'd say, did you guys summit? Congratulations, go set up camp, get some food. Did you guys make it? Oh, good job. Hey, did you guys summit? No? Come with me. Teams would be walking into camp. He'd have them drop their packs, go into the ranger hut. He'd pick up this beat up guitar and he'd start playing the song called Gnawing the Burnt Crust of Failure. I'm not gonna sing it, but it goes a little something like this. You spent 3 weeks of your life on a hunk of rock, ice, and snow, a lot of money, a lot of time. You're going home with nothing to show for it. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo, your life sucks. Boo-hoo, boo-hoo. The first time I heard this, I literally thought that team was gonna drag him out of the tent and beat him to death with that guitar. But at that point, I was actually with the team. We had made it. I didn't think much of it. We were in the middle of getting ready to cook dinner. Now, the next year, I was back up on Denali with a really special group. One of my first jobs as a professional guide was actually as a contractor for the Department of Defense. So before the SEALs, before the teams actually had embedded trainers for rock climbing, ice climbing, and mountaineering, I got to work with a really small, tight-knit group of folks to help teach the SEALs how to rock climb, how to ice climb, and how to mountaineer. And through that work, got involved with wounded warriors and soldiers to summits through a section of wounded warriors that focused solely on returning special forces and only doing things of deep, high impact with special forces. So instead of getting in a room of veterans and talking about leadership in that transition, we would actually take them on mountaineering trips to Denali and serious high-risk, high-angle things all over the world just to help them feel that sense of impact and also teamwork. And so I was with a group of ex-special forces, Delta, Marine Force Recon, SEALs, a trip on Denali, and we got stuck at 17,000 feet for 6 days trying to summit. Just didn't work out. Weather was too bad. We were running out of food and fuel. And we turned around, we were coming back down the hill, and we were all pretty upset and pretty bummed out. But I actually started to get excited because I knew that Daryl was on the mountain as a ranger. He was on a rotation. And if there was ever a group of people that could actually kill Daryl with their bare hands, it was these guys. So when we walked into camp, I saw Daryl, and Daryl was out doing his normal routine. Did you guys make it? No, yeah, yo, no. And I jumped up and down like, hey, Daryl, hey, buddy, we didn't make it. We're going to drop our packs. We'll be right in. Because I really wanted to hear this song. And so we came in, we sat down, he started singing this awful song, and then a funny thing happened. It was so awful and so bad, all the guys started laughing, including me. And I laughed so hard I fell off my chair. And he put his guitar down and he looked around the circle and he started asking a couple of simple questions. He said, can you not point to at least one time in the last 3 weeks where you didn't learn a little something more about yourself? Now, I had heard the stories from these guys for 3 weeks. And I thought, there's no way they're going to say they've learned anything new in this process. No way. They've been through everything. But a funny thing happened right in the middle of that process. They started talking about really simple things. One guy said to another, if you wouldn't have taken my food bag that day, I never would have made that carry to camp. My pack was so heavy. I wasn't going to make it. You knew I wasn't going to say anything. Thank you for taking it. Another guy said, you saw me crawling into my sleeping bag that night with wet socks. You knew my feet would be fried the next day. You dug into your pack. You gave me your last pair of dry socks. Thank you. And these were things that these guys did not say out loud to each other for 3 weeks. I was kind of astonished, and I realized that it was the simple things that added up to a greater level of success. And then, Daryl asked something that I kind of still to this day find really cheesy. And whenever I hear it, I'm kind of, ugh. What's more important, the journey or the destination? We hear it all the time, right? And I thought for sure these guys would be like, I'm good. Yeah, it's been impactful. I get it. I get the lessons. But instead, these guys that could have easily said, we're done. We've given service to our country. We've seen friends die. We're through. Realize that they still had more to give. And how often as entrepreneurs or as innovators do you feel like, God, I don't know if there's anything left in this process? And the reason why I share this with you is that when you start to think about truly how you define failure, the context and the lens that I always look through is you are capable of so much more than we give ourselves credit for. So much more. And for me, that's the biggest lesson that I got out of Alaska. And from there, I got sent to two of the more unique mountains out of the 7 summits. So at this point, career trajectory is, I feel, pretty on track. But then kind of an interesting twist. So one of the 7 summits is actually on the border of Russia and Georgia. So you fly into Moscow, you tour St. Pete, you go to St. Basil's Cathedral, you go to Red Square, vodka, caviar. It's this mountain right here. It's Mount Elbrus. It's a little over 18,000 feet. We do it as a ski mountaineering trip where you carry your skis to the top. You ski from 18.5 down to about 5.2. Your thighs never feel the same after a trip like that is done. It's an amazing trip. Really unique. It's on the border. It's in the Caucasus mountain range on the land bridge between the Black and the Caspian Sea. So a lot of clients after a trip would be done, they'd toddle off down to a resort on the Black Sea, hang out in a Speedo, go home. Kind of interesting. And then, you don't just fly over to Russia to do one trip in Russia and then fly home. You tend to stay on that side of the world just from a cost effectiveness perspective. So you get sent from Elbrus in Russia down to this mountain, Kilimanjaro, highest mountain in Africa, where you literally get to walk through every ecozone on the planet, from the jungle through the cloud forest, subalpine, and alpine. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Luis, my God, that's amazing. As an early 30-something-year-old, you were bouncing back and forth between Russia and Africa, time off out on Zanzibar. That's pretty great. Would you have felt successful? Did you feel good about where you were? And my answer to you was, I was pissed. I was really upset with my boss for being here because as a professional guide, this is where guides go to die. This is where guides go to retire. This is where you go to drink vodka, eat caviar, hang out on Zanzibar between trips. You carry a really light pack. All my other guide counterparts were in their 50s. Some of them were in their early 60s. I literally called my boss and said, did I do something wrong? Are you mad at me? Am I being punished? Why would you send me here? I'm one of your strongest, most technically gifted guides that you have. And then I had a kind of a critical conversation with them. I said, listen, you and I both know that I'm capable of something more. I want to be sent to the coldest, hardest, most remote place we operate right now. I'm sick of it. I'm not going back to Russia. I'm not going back to Africa. This is what I'm requesting. So he looked me square in the face. He said, Luis, I agree. I think you're ready for something different. I thought I was going to get sent to the Himalayas. Instead, I got put on the most expensive, no-frills flight on the planet. I got on the plane on the tip of South America, and I got off the plane in a place that looks like this. This is Mount Vinson, the highest mountain in Antarctica out on the Ross Ice Shelf, where you fly a special Russian jet on Ilyushin to a blue ice runway. So you're literally landing on a patch of ice. You get out of this plane, you load up into a smaller plane, you fly to Vinson Base Camp, you set up all your stuff, and you literally start walking into the middle of nowhere. Now, a little something about Antarctica. So on this mountain, typically, there are other teams around. So if you get into trouble, you can hop, everybody shares radio frequencies, and you can say, help, help, we're a day behind you, we're an hour behind you, we're an hour in front of you. We need you to slow down, speed up, I need a little assistance. Unless you are either the first team or the last team on the hill with nobody else around. Now, if you're the first or last team on the hill, you are the only human beings within about, what is it, Nico, like 100 nautical miles of the airstrip? That's it. So you could easily pull out the satellite phone and say, help, help. And they'd say, good luck. Maybe the next team will find you, dig you out, and kind of pull you off the trail. So literally on this trip, my first trip in Antarctica, the people you see in this picture and me taking the picture are the only human beings within that space. And all of a sudden, literally after I took this picture, it dawned on me that I was only as good and as capable as the people you see in this picture and me. I sweated every decision I made at this point. Things that were on autopilot for me professionally. Yeah, the stove kind of works like this. Here you go, have fun. Here's the food bag. Yeah, your tent kind of looks a little wonky, but whatever. Falls down on you in the middle of the night. No big deal. You'll survive. I realized that if anything went wrong on this trip, that the ramifications were going to be much more serious and much more severe. I stayed awake all night long, sometimes worrying about weather, location, what was going to happen, realizing that if I got anything wrong on this trip, that it was literally going to be the end of all of us. And when you talk about teamwork and you kind of look through that lens, after this expedition, it was kind of a sobering moment for me. And, I got back to Latin America and I called my boss. And, I said, thanks for that. And he kind of laughed like a good Kiwi. He's like, yeah, I thought you needed it. Was it good? Did you like it? And I kind of explained the lessons that I thought I had learned. He said, yeah, I know that was kind of a mean trick to play on you. And you're ready. If you want to go to the Himalayas, I think we can start talking about that. I actually chose to stay in Antarctica for another 2 seasons because I realized then that I wasn't ready. That I truly didn't have all the skill sets that I needed, that if nobody else was around and we were deeply in trouble, especially in the Himalayas, that I was just then, after all those years, beginning to truly understand and learn how to handle it. And it was kind of a sobering moment when you feel like you're taking nothing but steps forward to intentionally choose either a lateral step or a step back. How often are we faced with those things and you think, that's not progress? And I will always argue that those lateral or even back steps can help provide some of those skill sets that oftentimes we kind of fly right on by. And then another interesting thing was happening in my life at this point. Not narcolepsy. I really pissed at the person that took this picture because after he took it, he put something in my mouth. Professional fatigue. Anybody heard of that ever? Especially as entrepreneurs? Just like I've been doing the same thing. I've been launching towards the same thing for so long. Every time I think I got it, something falls apart. Maybe I'm just not doing what I'm supposed to do. Maybe I'm supposed to be doing something else. And I was definitely at that point in my career where I'm like, great. I do Everest, then what? Is it really that much? What else do I have in my life that I know I want to contribute? And so starting to have that conversation with myself, the invite to the Himalayas came in a really interesting way. I got a call from a friend in Denver who said, listen, there's this guy I know. He's a good friend. He's got an idea for a project in the Himalayas. He doesn't want to talk to a guide service. He just wants to talk to only friends of friends because this is a very, very high-level hush-hush thing. And he wants to have lunch with you. I'm like, okay, and what's going on? And the guy that my friend wanted me to meet was this gentleman. Don't let the monk hat fool you. He is not a monk, but he is a very, very snappy dresser. This is Eric Weinmeier, the only blind person to ever climb Mount Everest. Now, at the time, Eric was an English teacher here at Kent, Denver. He had climbed Denali and he'd climbed Kilimanjaro. And having never worked with anybody that was blind before, I sat down at the table, reached across the table, tried to figure out how to shook hands. And I asked him what his project idea was. And he said, Luis, I want to be the first blind person to climb Everest because I'm sick and tired of people telling me what I can and can't do. And immediately I went back to being an 8-year-old kid and my parents saying, don't go outside, can't do this, can't do that, that's dangerous, that's unsafe. And before I knew what I was even saying, for me in that moment, it was less about agreeing to go to Everest and it was more about agreeing to help Eric shatter that perception of what was possible. So I said yes to my first Everest expedition. As I was driving home from this lunch, a couple of things dawned on me. A, I had just agreed to climb Everest with the blind guy. B, it had never been done before. And C, why was he talking to a young, inexperienced guide that had never been to Everest before? So I started asking myself really critical questions, and I went home and I started calling some friends and started doing some snooping around. Turns out the reason why Eric was talking to me and other friends like me was because no professional guide with a little bit of resume and a little bit of experience would touch this expedition. Everybody was calling this professional suicide. Guaranteed that something was going to go wrong, something was going to happen, it was going to be a stunt. They wanted nothing to do with it. And these were people that we considered friends. But those of us that were young, not all that smart, but deeply passionate about this idea of shifting the idea of what was possible, we flew in after about 1.5 years of training and really started, asking ourselves these questions of, is what we're doing the right thing to do? We had this email inbox through a satellite phone. You know this picture, right? Yeah. I stole some pictures from one of their expeditions to prove a point. And that point is that we had these long conversations into the night about, is what we're doing a stunt? Is what we're doing actually the right thing to do? You know, when you're being innovative or you're being an entrepreneur, you're trying to do something that nobody else has ever done before. And there's going to be a lot of people that are going to call you stupid, foolish, foolhardy, and possibly reckless and dangerous. And we were getting all kinds of emails through our satellite phone saying, not only are you going to kill him, but you're also going to destroy your career, because who's ever going to want to go climbing with the mountain guide that intentionally killed a blind person on Everest? Don't do it. Foolish, foolish mistake. You know, but regardless of whatever you've read or whatever you've seen, Everest is still the largest mountain on the planet. And a lot of people will pit themselves against this endeavor to really figure out if they're capable and have what it takes. And you know, the other thing, and remember I talked about before that, yeah, you can label yourself an entrepreneur and an innovator, but there's all these other skill sets that come along with being a high altitude guide. You learn about finance, you learn about glaciology, you learn about all these different things. I chuckle with some of my teammates in the back quite frequently that I learned how to build a pivot table on an Excel spreadsheet on this expedition in a tent with a laptop. Try that one on for size, because my expedition, in their infinite wisdom, made me expedition treasurer. So it was kind of like one of those math problems that you have. I know, Amel's laughing hysterically. She's seen my finance grades. It's horrifying. Yeah, Nina's seen me work Excel, or try to. So it's not pretty. But it was like one of those math problems you have in school. If Luis leaves home with $480,000, 10 teammates, flies 5,200 miles with 4.5 tons of food, fuel, and equipment, rents 2 Russian helicopters, hires 37 yaks and 120 porters to walk 48 miles to base camp, how many dollars will Luis have left over? Yeah, exactly. 42. That's the answer. So it was this incredible logistical challenge that, I mean, there were mornings when I woke up, I'm like, I know my toothbrush is in a yellow duffel bag on the back of a yak, and the yak is a quarter mile up the trail. I'm not brushing my teeth today, that's fine. Trying desperately to keep track of stuff with the entire planet, especially our friends, hearing through media that what we were doing was foolhardy, foolish, a bad idea. The level of intensity at this point in my life, I had never experienced anything like this before. Being underneath that lens, really kind of evaluating everything you did. You know, when we got into base camp and set up base camp and kind of tried to get ready to go climbing, you see down at the bottom, and I know you can't read this, you know, base camp was almost at 18,000 feet. So just to get to the bottom and just to get set up and just to get started, you're living in a place that the human body definitely is not equipped to handle and stay at for a very long time. And you know, when we lined up to do our sponsor banner picture, you know, I share this with you just to illustrate kind of an important point. You know, as an innovator and as an entrepreneur and thinking kind of out of the box, you have to find people that believe what you believe. It's less about capital, and I think it's a little bit more about trying to build a holistic vision and bring people along with you. Now, at this point in my career, I had picked up a couple of sponsors, and Eric obviously had his too. So our 2 main sponsors were the National Federation of the Blind and my allergy medicine, Allegra. So we used to kind of say that this trip was the blind leading the sneezy, or the sneezy leading the blind, depending on what day it was. But the other thing we did is we intentionally packed 20% more of food and fuel because we wanted to host these potlucks with other teams in base camp. We wanted to actually share, kind of like you would for a happy hour for a startup these days, except on Everest base camp, because we wanted people to know that we weren't nuts, our intentions were good, we kind of knew what we were doing, and this was the thing that we were trying to do. So I'll never forget, there was this gorgeous Italian climber with the film crew in base camp. All the guys were just unhinged whenever she would walk by. And she had long blonde hair, she'd speak in rapid fire Italian, and we were kind of out recruiting other teams like, hey, come to dinner on Tuesday, come to dinner on Friday, kind of setting up a schedule. Just we wanted to meet people in base camp, meet the other teams, because it's an international community, and let them know what we were doing. And I happened to bump into this Italian climber kind of walking through camp one day and was totally smitten. And I said, please, just come to whatever day you want to come. I'll cancel whoever else is coming. Just come to dinner. And she told me, she's like, yes, I want to come to dinner, and I'm going to bring my film crew because I'm going to prove on camera that Eric is faking, that he's not blind, and it's a stunt. I was so just besotted with her beauty. I said, yes, absolutely. Whatever you say, just see you on Tuesday. Fantastic. Just come on over to base camp. So I went back, told the guys that she was coming, and she came to dinner. She sat down, and we all started having dinner and talking, and she started waving her hand in front of Eric's face. And if you close your eyes and you wave your hand in front of your face, do you feel kind of that puff of wind a little bit? Well, yeah, so you flinch, right? Even if your eyes are closed, you're like, whoa, what is that? And so Eric was flinching, and she'd say, aha, see, he's flinching, he's faking. Eric calmly turned to me and he said, if you don't tell this woman to stop waving her hand in front of my face, I'm going to show her just how blind I am. And I didn't have the heart to kind of try to stop this whole, it was like watching cable TV unfold right in front of me. She wouldn't stop. Eric calmly bent over, popped himself on the back of the head, pulled out his 2 glass eyes, went booga booga at her. She screamed like she was shot, went running out of the tent, and the film crew was laughing so hard, one of the guys dropped the camera, and word spread around base camp, A, Eric really is blind, B, their team is totally nuts. So whatever you're doing, just realize that that's who these guys are. But we were psyched. This was a dream, a lifelong dream for all of us. Eric had put together this team of young, hungry mountain guides that had never been on Everest before, that had literally spent their entire life dedicated towards one goal. Now, I shared with you my personal journey. From the time I was 8 years old to now, that's how hard I was working towards this, just to give you a little perspective. But the one time you really know that you're on a mountain unlike any place else in the world was when it would start to snow. And you poke your head outside the tent, and somebody would say, you guys got to come out here and see this, because you'd hear this low rumble outside the tent door. And you'd pop out, and you'd see these avalanches ripping off of 4,000-foot alpine walls they'd actually hit the valley floor with such force. If you had a cup of water on the table in front of you, depending on where you were at base camp, the water in that cup would bobble a little bit. And I'm sure most of you have read about the avalanche at base camp a couple years ago that killed a lot of people, a lot of friends, and decimated a lot of companies because of the earthquake and the subsequent avalanche. And so recognizing that we were in a place like that was incredibly sobering. And I don't know how much you all know about the Sherpa community, but no Everest expedition would be successful without their support. Period, end of story. And they have a process called a puja, which is basically asking for permission from the god that they believe lives on the mountain to climb. And we were kind of concerned that with all the media swirling around us, that these guys were going to think, ooh, this is a bad idea. I don't know if we really want to climb with these guys. They could care less if Eric was blind. They could care less if we were all inexperienced. What they cared the most about was that we were respectful of their process, of what they did and how they did it. And when they realized that there was unity within that process, the amount of magic that happens between a Sherpa team and a Western or European guiding team is something that's very difficult to describe. But the reality of them not caring what some of the handicaps were to our process, but genuinely interested in our success and our well-being, how often do we have teammates like that, especially when we're working in international teams? So experiencing this for the first time, I was really humbled and blown away by that process. And after the prayer flags were up around base camp, you kind of gear up to start walking. And you see these coming up valley, and you know that the cracks in the glacier at the bottom of the mountain are so deep and so wide, you have to take your average aluminum ladder from Home Depot, strap them together, and lay them down like a drawbridge. But you don't quite wrap your head around it until you come around the corner and see stuff like this, where you've got 7 ladder sections tied together, twisting in deep space, and with the blind guy with one leg windmilling in deep space, with us on top and bottom screaming, no, a little bit to your left, a little bit to your right, a little bit, okay, that's great, okay, now your left foot, pick it up, okay, and Eric would be windmilling, and other teams would see this and say, oh, they're definitely going to kill him. So other teams were making decisions to not climb on days that we were, to avoid the inevitable accident, which was really sobering. And the icefall is an incredibly dangerous place, but you finally pop out, you get to Camp 1, and you look at pictures like this, you're like, oh, it's like snow camping in Colorado, right? It's great in the wintertime, really fun. You're taking a nice little walk through a valley, sunshine, everybody smiles, but with this gigantic thing looming over your head. So if you want to talk in metaphors, when you're moving towards a goal or a project, and there's always that big thing you can't quite get your hands around, that's what it was like for us. And Eric would ask these questions, well, how big is it? And we'd say, really big. And he'd say, well, how big is really big? And we'd say, really, really effing big. And then we'd laugh, and we'd keep walking. And Eric would fall silent. And, trying to get your hands around the scale of this thing, and your head around the scale, was often a difficult challenge. And we got to Camp 2, and we got all set up. This is really advanced base camp, and you're looking at about 4,000 feet of climbing right here. Camp 3 is about halfway up this face, and Camp 4, the highest campsite on the planet, is actually up there. And so, knowing that, we were about halfway into the expedition, one night at sunset, Eric was walking by, and I told him to stop. The sun looked really good. I wanted to take a picture of him. And I took a picture, and he came over and sat down next to me. And I said, buddy, we could go home tomorrow, and we could call it a success. We're higher than any blind person's ever been on Everest. We're all safe. We're all healthy. You've done it. You've proven everybody wrong, that you are capable of doing this, that we are capable of doing this. I think it's pretty great. I thought we were going to hug, have a nice moment, and he was going to go to bed, and that was going to be it. Instead, he got this weird look on his face, and he turned to me, and he said, Luis, if you really think that we've done all that we can do, you might want to go down to base camp, pack up all your stuff, and go home. And I was kind of stunned, and I asked him what was wrong. And because I could tell he was clearly angry and upset. He said, every time I ask you guys how big it is, you say really big. And every time I say how big is really big, you say really, really big. You guys mock the fear that I have to live with every single day. Every single day I have to wake up and find a way to make the impossible possible. While you guys are just living the lifelong dream and talking all about how psyched you are to go to the top, I have to rely on you for every move I make, and I have to live with this fear constantly. So until you can answer how you make the impossible possible, I don't want you leaving Camp 4, because that's what I have to live with every fucking day. And he stormed off to his tent. I went back down to the dining tent, and I told the rest of the team the conversation that I just had with Eric. And what I realized at that point was kind of getting back to one of the original comments that I made, that when you're in this groove and you're in this moment and you feel like you're moving towards the thing that you want to move towards, do you ever stop to look around and assess how the people around you are actually doing? If you're bringing them along with you on this journey in a really effective way, are you leaving people behind? And when you leave Camp 2 and start heading for Camp 3, this is really where the rubber meets the road. It gets incredibly steep, incredibly icy. Every breath you take hurts, literally hurts. And your body, and whatever brain cells are actually working at that point, are screaming at you to turn around and go home. Because this is not a place that human beings are truly built for. And again, with this gigantic thing looming over your head. And so understanding that, when we got to Camp 3 and got dug in, this is as high as we were going to go before we started using oxygen. And you get Camp 3 set up and Camp 4 set up, and you really have to watch the weather reports, because when you leave Camp 3 on oxygen, if you blow your summit window, there's no 7-Eleven on the corner to refill your oxygen bottles. You're done. And so recognizing that, we dropped back down to base camp to wait for our summit window, and this blue line represents about 2 months of work at this point and about a lifetime of dreaming for me and a lot of other people on the team. And as other teams talked to us about when are you going, what are you going to do, what dates are you picking, and we started to tell them, every team that we talked to said, you guys go ahead. We're going to wait till you're done. We're going to give you some room. And again, to avoid what they perceived to be the inevitable accident. So we knew that heading up this mountain that we were going to be on our own. And I had these distinct memories of being on Vinson in Antarctica and being on our own and recognizing and asking myself that same question that I did in Antarctica. Do I feel like this is the right crew to burn the bridge behind us with? And to be able to answer that question effectively and with humility was a deeply, deeply impactful moment for me. Recognizing that if anybody was going to get this done, it was this team of people that I was with. When you do leave Camp 2 and you start heading up towards Camp 3 and Camp 4, you truly do have this sense of burning the bridge behind you. Because the minute you crack on one of those oxygen bottles and you turn it on, you have this mental clock where you're just kind of watching the levels diminish for all the bottles that you have. And as you walk into Camp 4, I started to get really, really excited because I knew we were going to be sleeping higher than anybody else on the planet that night. And being a student of Everest and looking at all the pictures and reading all the books and looking at all the magazines, I was running around without an oxygen bottle, kind of half awake and stumbling. I was just so damn excited to be there, setting up tents, handing out bottles, getting stoves going. The upper mountain was obscured by cloud. We really couldn't see what was going on above us. But finally, the clouds started to part, and I wanted to kind of check out what we had in front of us for that night, and this is what I saw. So if you knew nothing about Mount Everest or nothing about the Himalayas, and I showed you this picture first, what would you say?
You're at the base of the mountain.
But you know something about mountaineering, though, so that's not fair. Does it look like a camp at the bottom of a mountain? Does it look like you're just getting started? Yeah. 26,000 feet on Everest. Read every book, looked at every picture. You arrive in Camp 4, you look up, and it literally looks like you're just beginning. Nobody ever told me that. No picture described that. I never really sensed that. I was so dumbfounded. I sat down in the snow and laid back against a pile of fabric, just drooling, looking up at the hill like, what just happened? The only thought I had was somebody just moved the finish line. And I'll never forget, Ang Sading came over, and this is a Sherpa who at this point had climbed Everest 6 times himself. And I said, Ang Sading, did you know about this? Did you know it looks like this? And he said, yeah, Sherpas have funny joke. We call it mountain on top of mountain. Ha 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 ha. And so he finally said, Luis, you got to get up and move. Come on, crawl in the tent, have some tea. You look kind of tired. I said, buddy, I'm overwhelmed right now. This is a little big. He said, come on, get up and move. Come inside the tent and have some tea. And I finally asked him why he was being so insistent. And he said, Luis, he kneeled down, he got face to face with me. He said, Luis, you have to get up and move. You're laying on a dead body. What I thought was an old tent was actually another human being who in the exact same spot had the same hopes, the same goals, the same dreams that I did, laid down and never got back up. I was stunned. Got to my feet, scrambled backwards, crawled into my tent. All my buddies were taking pictures of each other and laughing on the radio down below, and I lost it. I said, there's a body 3 feet away from our tent. We're up here with the blind guy. The clouds have parted. Have you seen what it looks like outside? What are we doing? I managed to scare the hell out of everybody in my tent in about 15 seconds. So it went from a kind of a really jovial atmosphere in my tent to this. This is what everybody's face looked like at that point. And you know, how often do we scare ourselves and each other like, oh my God, this is bad. Everything's bad. Really, really bad. Do you know anybody like that? It's like whenever they show up, like, it's bad. We're all going to die. It's really, really bad. That was me at that point. And so knowing that, you know, right at that moment, Eric calls me from his tent. Luis, would you mind coming over here for a minute? And I knew the conversation he wanted to have because he had had it with all the other folks kind of going up to Camp 4. Do I believe that the impossible is possible? Where am I in that process personally for our summit attempt? And so what do you do when the boss calls you into the office, right? You put your game face on, go over to the tent. So I put my down suit on, unzipped the tent door, crawled over to his tent, unzipped his door, and this is what I saw. Now, you're already kind of cuckoo from living at 26,000 feet, but here's how my mental process went. Guy on the left can see playing cards. Guy on the right can see playing cards. Blind guy in the middle playing cards. I literally did 3 laps around the block mentally. I'm like, why is the blind guy playing cards? And he finally said, would you mind crawling in here and hanging out? I think these guys are cheating. What I found out months later was that he heard my conversation in my tent scaring the hell out of everybody. He heard my conversation with Ang sitting over the body. He asked the guy to the left to pull out a deck of cards and stage that just for me, to shift my mental paradigm. Only a friend, right? And so I crawled in, I sat down next to him, and I said, you know, hey, buddy, how's it going? He said, yeah, well, how are you doing? And I lied through my teeth. I'm good, we're good, it's good. I'm ready to go. I'm going to go have some soup, take a nap. We'll be ready to go tonight. He said, no, I heard your crack about being up here with a blind guy, and it sounds like there's a body outside your tent, and it sounds like it looks kind of hard up above. And I lost it all over again. And I said, yeah, I don't know right now. And he said, you know that question that I've been asking everybody, and I asked you at Camp 2. He said, yeah, if you ask me that right now, I'm going to stay here. You guys go, I'll be your support team, I'll stay at Camp 4. And he said, would it be helpful if I tell you how I make it possible living with you jokers every single day? How I make the impossible possible. And I told him I was all ears. He said, tonight when we go for the top, believe in me as much as I believe in you. Tonight when we go for the summit, believe that I am just as capable as getting this done as I think that you are. And maybe, just maybe, we'll get this done. How many agendas do we carry with the people around us? Like, Peter's good, but man, him in marketing, ooh, I don't know. I'm going to have to carry the water with that one. How often do we actually get out of our own way and say out loud, yeah, you know what? I deeply believe that you are just as capable as getting this done as I am. And I'm going to hand you that faith and that confidence. You know, I wish I would have had a map outside my tent door that night to describe what we were going to be up against, but instead all I had was this. Eric also knew it was going to be doubly hard for me that night because I was going to have to walk over the bodies of my first two bosses who perished in '96 on Everest. Scott Fisher, who owned Mountain Madness out of Seattle, and Rob Hall, the original CEO of Adventure Consultants, who was still about halfway up the mountain. You get up at 10 o'clock at night, start going for the summit, and I had climbed all over the world. I had spent a lot of years in Antarctica. I've never experienced cold like cold on summit night on Everest. And finally, after a freak storm about 1 o'clock in the morning, as the sun started coming up around 5 over Tibet, it was the best sunrise you'd ever see because heat's coming right along with it. And this is actually a picture, and you can't quite see it. That's the moon setting behind and the sun rising in front of Everest, and that shadow is actually the shadow of Everest herself. All those big, gigantic Himalayan mountains, that's how high we were at that point, well over anything else. And nobody was angling to summit with Eric. It was sort of whoever's voice and throat wasn't shot from pulling down their mask and screaming at Eric where to step. A lot of us joked that we climbed Everest the first time half on oxygen because the mask was kind of dangling around our necks because we had to talk to him so frequently. And at this point, another guide, Chris, said, my voice is shot. Luis, step in, take over. And it's really kind of left foot, right foot, breathe in, breathe out, way, way above Camp 4. And at this point, Eric's line of questioning kind of shifted to, how close are we? Are we there yet? How close are we? Are we there yet? And, having never been on Everest before, but losing sense of all time and space because you're climbing through the night, I said, buddy, people are congregating on top of this bump. They're changing oxygen bottles. We got to be close. Let's get on top of this thing and let's see what we see. Got to the top of what turned out to be the South Summit, and this is what I saw. The final piece of real estate on the planet. I stopped so dead in my tracks, Eric ran right into the back of me. Now, looking at this piece of terrain with the jet stream wind screaming from Nepal over into the Tibet side, with only a couple of Sherpas out in front of us, I could have easily said exactly what I was feeling. I was scared out of my mind, not quite sure how we were going to get this done, being so far in front of the rest of the team. And Eric asked me a question that he had asked a million times before on this trip. What does it look like? But here's where my perception shifted and my paradigm shifted. I turned around, I pulled down my mask, I grabbed him by the shoulders, said, buddy, it's a cakewalk. You got it. We're there. Another hour and a half, we'll get this done. Believe in me as much as I believe in you kept ringing through my head. I had no idea how we were going to get this done because everything in every cell is screaming to turn around and go home, especially being scared about technical terrain and only seeing a couple other human beings out in front who seriously could not help at this point. And as we left the South Summit and started moving towards the main summit, we started to get really excited because after you get over the Hillary Step, which is about 40 feet of vertical rock climbing at 28,000 feet, it's somewhat of a home stretch. And Eric started asking, is the rest of the team close? Where are they? And I'd turn around and I'd see people on the ridge. And I'd say, buddy, I think they're close, but our radios are getting interference. I can't really talk to them. I'll never forget when we got to the top of the Hillary Step, oops, I did it again. We got interference from a radio station in Tibet. And so a Britney Spears song came on our radios. It was very, very surreal. So we were all standing around at about almost 29,000 feet listening to Britney Spears. Whenever anybody asks me what the true definition of teamwork and friendship and breaking accepted paradigms looks like, I try to show them this picture. This picture hangs in my office to this day. It's every single Sherpa and guide waiting at about 28,000 feet for Eric to summit. So that promise that if Eric couldn't do it, that we were there for Eric, that was the reason why we were there. If he wasn't going to go, we weren't going to go either. And eventually, you come around a corner and there's no place else to go. People do often ask me, Luis, you summited with Eric, you came back down, yep, still 10 fingers and 10 toes. What's between the ears, I think, works reasonably well. Why would you ever choose to go back and do these things and, to the job, current state, working for Governor Hickenlooper, overseeing the entire outdoor industry economy for the state? Why is it so important? Why do these things matter? What do these things provide not only to our economy and to the level of jobs that we have in the state? How does it all connect? And I could stand up here for hours and tell you about stories that I feel are personally inspirational and things that I've been able to experience. But the thing I want to leave you with, a couple of key points. The first point is, I don't think that ability to drive and deliver comes from you as an individual. I believe it comes from all those special little moments you share with the people around you every single day. It's that person to your left and right that you get to work with and absorb experiences with on a daily basis. It's those memories of the heavy lifting, the weird moments, the fun moments. Those are the things that I truly believe galvanize a process that define what kind of a future could be possible. And you know, for the outdoor industry, for everything that we do globally, these questions are ubiquitous. How do we handle and take care of our natural resources to drive an economy, but also provide a legacy for understanding how these things interconnect with growing grit, tenacity, determination, leadership? I think these are the questions that I wrestle with, but also I think these are the things that literally and metaphorically somewhat lift us up. So the point I'm going to leave you with is this, because I think this is something that we all need to think about on a daily basis. So this is Ang Seding, one of my very, very best friends, right up until the time he was killed on the avalanche, in the avalanche on Everest 2 years ago during the earthquake. But after every trip that we worked together, I was always really excited to go spend time with this man, his father. And you know, we call him a gentleman of leisure because he'd hang out, spin his prayer wheel, and spend time with his family. And with Ang Seding translating, I would always ask, you know, I'd always try to explain what Ang Seding had done for me and done for our team, and all the different components of things that I think he's done well: success, failure, triumph, tribulations. And he'd always ask me the same question that I'm going to leave you with every single time I talk to him. First thing he'd say is, "Luis, Lulu," that was my nickname in Nepal, "you brought a lot of white people and money to my country again. Thank you." Thank you, thank you, thank you. Many, many white people. But answer this question. What is it that you do every single day that's going to make my grandchildren's world better? What is it that you do every single day that's going to make their life better? And I think whatever you do, whatever you're pointed towards, we constantly have to be asking ourselves that question. When you are done, A, who's going to replace you? And B, what will you leave behind? Thanks, everybody. That's it. 10:03. Don't have any time for questions. Huh?
Do you want to take questions? Or you want to just
well, I know people. If people have to go, right? I think my email is right there. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, you can use the state or the DU one. If you got to jump, go ahead and jump. I'm sure my classmates need to go.
No one's jumping, dude.
Yeah, like $20 an hour. It's great. If anybody wants to help, that'd be great. Thank you. Any questions, comments?
Are you planning on going back?
No.
Never?
No, not never. No plans right now. There's a couple of routes that I'd really like to do. One being the West Ridge.
Okay.
But it has to be with the right people, the right time. So.
I was going to do Lookout Mountain. Can you do it?
Yeah, sure, for you, buddy. Anything. We can't even get together to do a 14er in our class. We're somewhat dysfunctional in that way. It is. It's a time commitment.
At the end of your presentation, you talked about how he asked you, what are you doing in order to make
This is mine.
his grandchildren's life better every single day? What's your answer to that question?
Damn you, Andy. This is a totally different talk. In 2008, I was climbing in Tibet, and I was on the border between Tibet and Nepal, and witnessed an international incident that most climbers or most humans don't get the chance to see. So if you think of the Mexican border, the border between Tibet and Nepal, there's a low pass near this mountain I was on called the Nangpala that Tibetan refugees use to escape Tibet, cross through Nepal, and get to Dharamsala, India, where the Tibetan government in exile resides. And at this point, my career was exactly where I wanted it to be. Things were moving in the right direction. We witnessed the Chinese military stream into base camp, and with a group of refugees running uphill at 18,000 feet, kneel and starting to shoot indiscriminately at these refugees that were trying to escape, murdering a couple of them in cold blood right in front of our base camp, about a quarter mile away. And at this point, you know, a lot of the conversations with a lot of the climbing companies were, stay quiet, don't talk about this, it's not our problem. It's their problem. It's a civil thing that they need to worry about. I wasn't satisfied with that. I broke the news. I had a childhood friend that was an editor at Reuters. Called him and said, "You're gonna have no time to fact check this. I'm gonna write a story. You're gonna have to post it. You're gonna have to trust me." Broke the story to the world media. All hell broke loose. I started working for International Campaign for Tibet. I testified at the EU. I testified in front of Congress. I went to The Hague. I went to the Spanish High Court. They tried Wu Jintao, the then president of China, for crimes against humanity under universal law, which isn't genocide, but it's one step below. I'm a mountain guide at this point. And I got a phone call when I was planning the next Everest expedition. And I'll end with the story because I know everybody's got to go. I was packing my next Everest trip in my garage, and the phone rings, and I pick up the phone, and this guy says, "Hi, my name's Lodi Gary. I'm the Dalai Lama's special envoy in Washington, D.C. His Holiness has heard about all the work that you're doing with Tibetans, and he would like to meet you." And I'm so busy with packing for Everest. I'm like, "Yeah, thanks. When I'm done with my trip, please tell His Holiness that I'll try to stop by Dharamsala in June if he's around. Very honored. Thank you. Bye." Click. Hung up the phone. My friends came in, and I remember I told them what was going on. My hand was still on the phone. I'm like, what just happened? And they're like, "Oh my God, you said no, jackass. What did you just do?" And the phone rang 5 minutes later, and it was the executive director of the International Campaign for Tibet. And she said, "Luis, pop quiz. When the Dalai Lama special envoy calls you and says that His Holiness would like to meet you, what do you say?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay." You say yes. I went to Dharamsala before that Everest trip, and what was supposed to be like a 10-minute meet and greet turned into about a 45-minute conversation with the Dalai Lama, his interpreter, and me. And I was lamenting at that point what I felt like was the loss of my career, because I had put my entire life into being a mountain guide. That's all I wanted to do. And there's still a large part of me to this day. If I could go back to that and have that piece of me would. But, he laughed at my story. And he said, and he's always laughing and always smiling. He said, "Yeah, I'd love to still live in Tibet and be my people's spiritual and temporal leader. But we're in India." I'm just a great guy. And he said, "Luis, sometimes your path, sometimes you don't choose your path. Sometimes you don't choose your path, sometimes your path chooses you. And then it's up to you to decide how you want to engage." And when I realized, I started connecting some of those other dots. I started realizing that, wow, working for human rights and on a global political scale, talking about policy, I started talking to my other mountain guides. I'm like, "God, yeah, but I'm just a mountain guide." And Mike Kiko, a really good friend of mine, is like, "Luis, you're the only mountain guide I know that carries back issues of The Economist in a little Ziploc up and down and whines about different political positions with countries around the world that nobody's ever even heard of. This is also a part of who you are and what you do. And so if you're going to do this, do it." And I think that for me is what I'm trying to give back. So when I think about the next generation and trying to understand some of these things, it's education. It's trying to figure out some of the pieces that we're trying to work on in class. It's also trying to understand that this economy in the outdoor industry, if we start rolling back, and I don't care about your political ideology, we start rolling back some of these issues with the EPA and some of these regulations, asthma will be back on the rise again in urban corridors. What I had to live with and struggle with every single day, we're going to see it again. I think the outdoor industry in our economy can affect and drive some of these dialogues. If you add us up nationally, just really quick, we're over $860 billion in consumer spending. That is larger than the auto industry and the pharmaceutical industry combined. We're worth over 7.6 million American jobs. That's not a seasonal fun kid economy. I'm a ski guide, I live out of the back of my truck, I go rafting in South America, my life is all fun. We're actually an economic powerhouse. And so our responsibility to the next generation is actually to activate that political platform. So I think that's what we can give back. That's what I'm trying to do in giving back.
When are you going to run?
Great question. For what?
Anything.
Like take a run? Go for a run?
What office are you running for next?
This is my office right now. We'll keep doing this and then we'll see what comes next. Thanks everybody. Have a good day.